This is Dave Meltzer with Entrepreneur of the Playbook, and I have Nick Keller, founder and CEO of Benchmark. Benchmark is an extraordinary business in London. Has 4 different business units under it, but aligned with compassionate capitalism. There's a bigger purpose to what you do. I know you started as a sports agent, just like I did in my sports career. A lot of people ask, how do you connect the dots backwards from being in one of the most scarce competitive industries into being truly an abundant, social, impactful leader?
David, thanks for having us here, and excited to be with you. I think you have to go to the roots, don't you, of where you start. And fundamentally for me, drawing together sport and social change came very much from the heart of my experience in education. I was a pretty average student. Average is actually being generous. But where I found solace was on the sports field, particularly on the rugby pitch. And it's, I suppose, through that experience, and it was a hell of a struggle actually getting through school, despite how much money my parents threw at the problem. It was still always a struggle. And so at the very heart of it, sport was a bit of a salvation for me. And it's where I found solace. And I suppose at the heart of everything I've done in business comes down to a simple truth that I have a belief that sport can have a positive impact on individuals, on community, on society. And now, I suppose more than ever, will play and should play a dramatic role in what our society looks like at the moment.
So there's 2 schools of thought when it comes to sports, right? Sports is such an emotional attachment. And I think the 2 schools come from the necessity of sports, that it's a microcosm of the world and we should utilize sports to unite the world and move on. And then there's the school of thought that sports is a distraction, right? That the higher level people that utilize and run the world have utilized sports to distract us from what's truly going on, as long as they're on the pitch or watching on TV or their handhelds. Where do you think there's credibility in each of these different perspectives?
I mean, look, there's credibility in all these areas. You know, we've seen politicians use large-scale events to drive forward their country's brand, whether it's a good brand or a bad brand. But at the very most, sport is far more multifaceted than that. It sits at the heart of our communities and isn't just a pastime. It's a place for learning and education as well, and a fundamental part of the growing experience. And if we look at where we are with young people today and the speed and the amount of information that's available to them, I think sport is actually more vital now to slow the world down, to show young people that you have to learn a skill, that things aren't so immediate, that you have to play in teams, that putting your head up from your social media account and communing with people in a very authentic way is now completely crucial to society. And I think now more than ever, when that multifaceted nature of sport that I believe in, that can lend itself to developing the Sustainable Development Goals and areas of sustainability, can pull communities together, is now at its most vital than I think it's ever been. When I set up Beyond Sport, which is one of the organizations 11 years ago, I knew the simple truth. Now I look at sport and I see the real necessity, and a reasonably urgent one, that can touch upon all the things that we're worried about at the moment, which is the polarization in society, which is young people and mental health. And the event we're hosting at the end of this week with the LA Dodgers and Tiger Woods Foundation, Beyond Innovation, which is how can sport be used to fill the interest gap around STEM and science, technology, engineering and maths, which is such a vital conversation now. This isn't just where the corporate sector are going to recruit their next data analysts and computer scientists. It's about the very way we deliver sustainability globally.
And when I look at Benchmark and the business units that you have, there is a separation with technology in the acceleration and growth of technology, especially over the last decade. You know, I find that all of our crucial institutions, when you talk about sport, our financial institutions, our political institutions, our educational institutions, our financial institutions, our political institutions, all of them are antiquated over a decade. This has never happened before, that there's such a separation between what we're doing. The interesting glue, as I look at you and what you're doing, is Benchmark, is that although the financial, the political, sport touches all of those at all times. And a lot of people don't realize how integrated sports is, and not just their team, or not just their city or state or province, but literally it is a glue that sticks all of these different antiquated institutions together. And it seems like to me Benchmark is utilizing sport to help accelerate each of those different institutions to create hopefully a brighter future instead of a segregated, separate future.
Sport touches on economics, politics, social. It naturally kind of integrates with it all. As we're facing sort of these increasingly complex and challenging times, one of the things that we've noticed, and one of the things we do with Beyond Sport, is we bring together the private sector, public sector. And what we know that sport really delivers in communities, doesn't it? We all know that if you bring the network that sport has around it, it's pretty staggering that it reaches into so many communities, and we have those governing organizations that connect it all. It's a phenomenally powerful thing. But one of the most important things I think we do is bind them together, and we know we can create around education, health and inclusion, that sport can have a dramatic impact. It can have an impact around youth justice, and so many different areas. It can around social justice and peace building. We've seen organisations and funded organisations on the very edge of society disarming gangs. And as we see that happening on a very local level, what we need to do is take sport, add the corporate sector back in and all the innovation the corporate sector brings to it all, and then also bring in the global governance that can expand and really ensure that we hit to scale. Because as much as what some of the sports teams can do in their local area, or even an NGO as such, what we have to do is the issues we're dealing with are truly global and of a scale that we've never quite seen before. And so ensuring that all the different elements of governance, of private sector, of NGO, all that innovation can blend together, and we use the infrastructure that's there to make sure we have proper impact globally.
So we've touched on Beyond Sport, but there's so much more that you do. And, as I look at your business, can you help describe how the business has evolved to where it's at in each of, I think there's 4 business units that you have?
So I started off, I was actually in real estate.
Like the rest of us.
Yeah. And for the lack of not knowing what I wanted to do, I wasn't expected to get to university. I wasn't, but I worked incredibly hard to get there, and ended up going to play rugby at a very good university at Durham. And then after that, wasn't sure what to do. So did an MA, and then ended up in the real estate business in the middle of the recession in 91 to 93. And so it wasn't a great time to be there. But then rugby turned professional in that magnificent moment when Mandela handed the trophy over to Francois Pienaar, the South African. We've seen a significant moment like that 2 weeks ago in Tokyo, when we saw the first black man for South Africa captain lifting the trophy. Considering what the Bok emblem meant during apartheid, that was a truly phenomenal moment. But that started with Mandela and Francois Pienaar in 95, and the game turned professional the next week. I quit my job that week and started up a rugby agency, working, literally going to my friends who were going on to play for England and saying, can I manage you? Obviously, I had no idea what I was doing, but trust is a very important word, as you know it, in life. So developing from there, we now have a business, and any athletes we look after now sit amongst our consultancy, Think Beyond, which helps brands, corporates, governing bodies, federations, teams, and celebrities really understand their impact on the world and how they can impact sustainable development and what we would call purpose. So we have a consultancy organization that works for the likes of Bloomberg, ESPN, Disney, some major organizations, and of course the US leagues who we all work with as well, and the IOC.
And that's with a global focus.
Yeah, so our consultancy clients are based globally. Yeah, so we're working very much worldwide with that. We're based in London, have an office in New York as well, but work in I think we're in 25 countries working at the moment, and Beyond Sport itself as a platform reaches 140 countries. Wow. And we do significant funding worldwide for some of the best organisations out there that are delivering social change. I've also, I suppose we've also developed what I call a health and fitness and purpose offering through a relay race that happens in 13 cities around the world, or it will be 13 this year. And that's called the Bloomberg Square Mile Relay, which is a phenomenal corporate relay race. 10 people run 1 mile each, has a phenomenal social piece to it. Oh, it's great fun.
That's good.
It's 1 mile.
That's right up my alley.
It's 1 mile with a baton in hand, and people haven't held a baton since they were at school. They get very excited about that. And that's a really, that's grown quite dramatically from 1 city in London now to 12 cities, particularly really exciting, Singapore, Shanghai, Beijing, Sao Paulo, San Francisco, London. It's a really exciting race. And then where I really started actually to grow my network is I've been running something called the Sport Industry Group in the UK now for nearly 20 years, and that's the main network for sport in the UK around sport. And we run the Sport Industry Awards, which is the largest commercial sport awards in the world. Around 1,700 people attend that every year. So that's a really exciting element. And finally, we have an esport business. We about a couple of years ago, I looked at esport, didn't quite know what the positioning would be, felt it would be important to own our own rights, thought, where's this going to be authentic? And I thought universities are going to be truly authentic. So we signed a unique partnership with the equivalent of the NCAA in the UK. So for the next 10 years, we own the rights for British university championships around esport. And it's a wonderful way of engaging young people around STEM as well, and bringing that community together, which is very different from the sports community, but has very much a lot in common as well.
It's extraordinary. I've been involved as an owner, of course, in Splice and Overactive Media, and we're blessed to do that, but also with ETF, who's the NCAA here in the United States, with the top 50 schools right now.
Yeah, it's
very
an
involved.
Interesting area, and they're a great community, and they understand teamwork, and they connect into some really fascinating areas. And so one of my fascinations in it is, yes, building a community that can impact on society, being authentic, but also looking at some of the areas where gender play an issue, where STEM plays an issue as well. And so we're
even
excited.
physical capability. I love the esport idea of, everyone is equal when they're playing. Even people that don't have all of their facilities physically can be extremely competitive in the space, whether they can walk or not, and not be separated by a para adjective in working with the Olympics. I just love the continuity and community that's created. One of the things that I see as a common thread through all the businesses, and I find it remarkable that as my career has evolved from selling legal research online to the most notable sports agency, the marketing, the media, and all of these things, I look back and I still think, here's an average student, maybe a little less than average student, who had great tenacity, but you're extremely clever in utilizing that first jump into the inner circle. And I think both of us have taken advantage of the inner circle that we both moved into laterally. Right, I was blessed to be with Lee Steinberg, who gave me a gold key into the inner circle of sports and entertainment, and you received yours by having the gumption and foresight to go ask your buddies if you could manage them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yet we've evolved to a much more critical role in the world to have great impact. And I think that's both one of the issues that both of us are looking at is the mental health and well-being. And we talk about community because I think one of the things that I see is I look to impact over 1 billion people in my life to be happy, because I think this mentally challenging separateness that exists throughout sports and everything else. And I think sports is a great key to it, but it's really what I see Benchmark is about, is you're building communities.
So, the interesting thing on the mental health piece, it's always personal, by the way, when someone's in it, and we'll come on to that. We've started a platform called Stay in the Game with the US leagues all behind us, and the Centerstone and the National Action Alliance, Suicide Prevention. And we'll be hosting that again this year. We had the first one this year. A crucial conversation. The mental health piece is, for me, one of the most exciting pieces about it, and where sport can play a really fundamental role, is when we look in the workplace, there's this complete intersection around performance that exists. What I'm interested in is where vulnerability and performance intersect. Because we're now in a time where we've got to create environments where people can truly be themselves, when they can express vulnerability and their performance will not be doubted. And where that is, that most poignant and exact is between sports coach and athlete, and where you are at the edge of the human capacity physically, emotionally, and mentally in many ways. So I think sport has a huge role to play in demonstrating to people that it's okay to talk about it, that it's vital, that actually human performance benefits from vulnerability. And, my journey, and I was talking to one of your team, Jake, in the car over here, and the more crucial sport is when you are younger, the more you have to disentangle yourself later in life. My experience is, and this applies to a lot of professional sports people that I've worked with, we use it as a crutch to get through some of those most vulnerable moments when we are younger. And although I wasn't a professional sports person, or I was close to a lot of professional sportsmen, it took me 10 years to unravel the insecurity, the anxiety, because I've been using sport as a crutch to get me through to those little boosts on the ego, the self-esteem that comes from putting a crunching tackle on someone, or for having the ability to take your anger out in a legal way on a sports field. And so for me, I think sport has a huge role to play to helping young people understand their own mental health issues. I think it has a vital role to play. I mean, we all know the physical benefits, don't we, of sport, and the mental benefits as well. But playing in that team environment can be a very, very positive thing. I think we have to be cautious to ensure that we don't let kids engage too heavily in sport to the detriment of themselves later on in life as well. And I think that's quite an important thing. It took me a long time to unpick it and rediscover who I was without the crutch of sport.
That's really interesting. I think, looking at your business, and there's so many different causes and purposes and arms to it, and a lot of people, as this is an entrepreneurial show as well, probably like, how the heck do you do it all? So I'm going to ask you a critical question about just time management and focus. So a lot of people have difficulty building one business with 10 people, and you have so many different businesses and projects, and it's a significant level and significant amount of people are involved. What is your best advice for time management and focus?
Hire remarkable, brilliant people. At the end of the day, I've had a fundamental problem. I'd imagine if I was at school now, they'd be rolling out ADHD, they'll be rolling out dyslexia,
right?
They'll be rolling out a lot of names. But back in your and my day, I think we're in the same generation.
Yeah, we are a little older, but it made me run around the block. That was the cure.
We sat at the back of the class in abject confusion over with what I was described as unteachable,
right?
By one teacher in a school report, which is devastating. Actually, it's devastating words to hear from an educator.
Yeah.
And so for me, focus took me 15 years. So I failed many times through that lack of focus. Discovering you have a creative mind through an education system that is antiquated and hasn't changed greatly now for the current environment we're in.
This is even worse.
Which is even worse. And when you think about the distilling of information, I heard you were at Web Summit, weren't you? So yeah. Tony Blair said something really interesting at Web Summit. Teaching isn't teaching anymore. It's just distilling the amount of information we're throwing at young people. And I think we can have a whole further chat about that later, because I think it's a very interesting area. So fundamentally, for me, focus was always very difficult, and it was my downfall. So once I mastered that to a point, it was all about hiring remarkable, brilliantly intelligent, normally younger people that, and I have some exceptional people in my team, MDs, that lead it, which leave me to probably get on with what I'm best suited for, which is is around the creative drawing dots together. I think you're someone that draws dots together for people. I get that sense as well. That's a very entrepreneurial piece. It's a creative piece of saying, that's going to work. That bit's going to fit in there. which means we're probably not the most academic of people at the same time. But so for me, that's a really crucial point. But I think when I think about those key things to business success, and who you hire, and autonomy is very crucial. People that can get on with things themselves is vital. So that's a big thing for me. Someone that you can hire that's autonomous. The second piece is someone that's restless. And restless can be seen in a negative way and a positive way. For me, this restless is this itch to do things better or find out how I can do things differently, and to always question, not in a negative way, how we can get better at something. So I think if someone told me to choose two words, it would be that autonomy and restlessness. And of course, focus, we know, is crucially important.
That's awesome. I always say be kind of your future self. Be more interested than interesting.
Yeah, I saw you.
That's right. What you're talking about. Last issue, when we get stuck into this more compassionate capitalism side of things, purpose-driven lifestyles that revolve around business and NGOs and all types of organizations, but truly impactful business. One of the words that is neglected, but yet you seem to do a really great job at it, is profitability. And profitability, some people think, is counterintuitive to what we do, but to me it's crucial. So I'd love to see your perspective of profitability in your business and how you execute on or prioritize the profitability of the business beyond the purpose.
So what's interesting is we started talking about a shared value model as soon as Professor Michael Porter from Harvard coined the phrase in 2011. The whole business was established. The Beyond Sport group was established off the very notion that the corporate sector was going to need a place to hide or soften itself post the financial crisis. And that was the basis of our business. That we had an instinct, I suppose, that you're going to have to mix social and business objectives together. Tony Blair, who was our chairman actually to start with, said in our opening, it was a remarkable opening, we had a lunchtime gathering, and it was Martin Sorrell was there from former WPP, and Keith Mills was there, the guy who ran the Olympics, Lord Putman from UNICEF, and Tony Blair got up and said, this was, remember 2008 we launched.
Yeah.
So right in the middle of it all. And he just turned around and he said, my only hope is we can hang on. You're so ahead of the wave. I hope we can hang on. And he's completely right. And now everyone obviously is talking about purpose, and we don't sound so groundbreaking anymore.
Right.
But that's another discussion about where the future goes of purpose is fascinating. So for me, getting the mix right is not seeing purpose as a 360 turn in your business. Many people come to me and say, what's our purpose? At a law firm, come to me and say, what's our purpose? Your purpose is to bill more hours. It's just to do it through the prism of whether it works for society. And you now have more stakeholders than your shareholders. Your stakeholders, your employees, they are your clients. They are your supply chain. And of course, they're your shareholder. But it's also society as well. And I think, so for us, that is a complete 360 look that we'll have. If someone comes to us and says, I just want to be good to society, it's too broad. It's almost too big a brief for us to work to a little bit. But I also feel at the moment that when people are talking about it, and I attended an event last week, and the subject matter was profit and purpose discussed. And I said, well, can we stop talking about that and just talk about profit, actually? Because the way things are moving, the consumer is changing. So attitudes are changing. I think it's 76% of under 35 will make a decision now based on whether they're buying off someone ethical or sustainable. We know now that certain people will really check out who they're going to be working for and whether they're contributing to society in some sort of way. So I think we need to stop this conversation on how do you blend the two together, because the reality is the market's changed. So I think that's quite important. So there's that business case. On the broader case, there's a necessity to change at the moment. And that's for all of us, because fundamentally it's tougher for business to sell to a fragmented world. And as issues become more substantive to deal with, the private sector has to blend very much and support the public sector over what change is going to look like. And most fundamentally, this comes to life when we look at innovation and change. You were at Web Summit, and I was sitting there looking around, pretty amazing, 70,000 people.
Yeah, sold out.
Yeah, you know why I looked at it? And I saw the largest gathering of white people I've ever seen in my entire life in one place.
Wow.
I reckon 95% of the people attending Web Summit were white.
I was one of the darkest people there.
Yeah, it was mind blowing. And, you know, that's why Beyond Innovation, as we're having now, you know, down at the LA Dodgers and with the Tiger Woods Foundation, with ESPN, SAP and EverFi, is such a crucial event. Because my sense is that we only like sharing the spoils when we've created enough for ourselves. And as I walked around Web Summit and I was hosting some panels, and you know, the UN Compact was there, and I was hosting something at the Sustainable Development Goals media zone there. And I just looked around. I said, this is a complete disaster. Because when we're facing some of the most challenging times around sustainability, hugely challenging times, innovation's what's going to pull us out.
No doubt.
And at the edge of it, if we're not bringing everyone to the party on this, you know, we've got a problem on hand. If we're not making sure that we have gender equity, that we're bringing people in from less advantaged communities, that we're sharing this tech revolution with a more diverse group, where's the diversity of thought going to come from? How are we really going to address most of the issues around those 17 Sustainable Development Goals are being are on the people that are less advantaged. So they know what's going on the ground. They know the reality. So that real challenge, I think, is how do we really truly make innovation a conversation? If this really is about the whole world coming together effectively, then we really have to make that a whole thing. But as I walked around Web Summit, I was blown away by it. And I walked away thinking we have a even bigger discussion to have around STEM education, around how we make the tech revolution something that's shared. And I think that's quite a big piece to pull together as well.
Yeah, I love your perspective and the awareness and attention. You know, out of all the people that I knew there, met there, spent those days there, sharing the same as you, from stages to panels to mentorship to, you know, I would have to say that's something that I try to be cognizant of. And until you said that, it didn't click in my mind what a disaster that actually was or is. But there's so many complex issues which puts you in the forefront, because without people like you, without the insight, experience, situational knowledge in order to execute or at least share a different perspective as a consultant with the largest organizations. And I know we work closely with SAP and their global initiatives and AN and just amazing companies that are there. We just have, I think, a really big chore, and that's why I believe in enjoying that consistent, persistent pursuit. And I'm glad that there's people like you that are leading the way. And I know you're here with the Dodgers and Tiger Woods Foundation, which a lot of our former interns and employees will be involved as well, sharing with the world how we just step by step, crawl before we walk, before we run, make this a better place to live. And I think that's the perspective that I love to share on this place is, look, a lot of these issues may scare you, may be complex. You may not understand everything that we talk about, but in the end, it's all about just trying your best to make this a better place to live.
Yeah, and I think for our industry, this is the great joy and the opportunity and the optimism of it all. Our industry, sport, has this fantastic opportunity to draw people into this discussion, because I think you mentioned it at the beginning, it kind of, everyone sort of beavers around it, whether it's government, private sector, whatever it is, everyone's engaged in it. And as we look at that perspective, it's that reach out to all the rights holders, teams, leagues, etc., to understand that we are in changing times, and that we do as an industry have this fantastic opportunity to really bring things together and use ourselves as a platform to reach out. You know, the great challenge for around sustainability is, who have we got to engage the most? Young people and corporations, who are probably the most engaged in sport, a little way, the corporations. So I look at our opportunity as an industry and what you and I do, David, and what you've talked about. You know, so much in every book you've read, you've written it. It kind of talks about it, and so at the very heart of it, we have this wonderful opportunity to deliver real change but we need to move on and make sure that we're engaging with the right people.
Well, it's certainly been a pleasure having you here, Nick. And just looking forward to all the great things that you're going to do. And more importantly, I'm looking forward to getting engaged with you to help assist in any way I can to be of service. So what an extraordinary business. I love to learn about it. I held off on doing too much research, actually, because I love to learn right without, there's just that when you're doing these things, for me, it's a balance of understanding where that background is, but most importantly, at least getting a fresh perspective to ask the right questions, or else you do so much. We'd be so far away from what I think people would understand. So thank you so much for your service.
Dave, thank you for everything you do and everything. It's been a pleasure to be here, and thanks to your team.
Yeah, they're awesome. We got Nick Keller, CEO and founder of Benchmark. Check him out. He is a world thought leader, and that's an understatement, with Dave Meltzer, Entrepreneurs, the Playbook.